Clara Bennett's knees hit the frozen church floor. The letter crumpled in her fist, 3 lines that destroyed everything. I cannot marry beneath my station. Forgive me. No signature. Thomas Harrington didn't even have the courage to sign his own cowardice. Snowflakes drifted through the open door behind her, settling on her mother's wedding dress like cold tears. 200 people watched. 200 people waited for her to shatter. If you want to know what happens when a broken bride meets a silent cowboy with secrets of his own, subscribe to my channel and stay until the end. Comment your city below. Let me see how far Clara's story travels. The church bells had been ringing for 20 minutes. Clara Bennett stood at the back of Silver Ridge's only chapel. Her fingers twisted in the yellowed lace of her mother's wedding dress. The fabric smelled like cedar and lavender, like the trunk where it had waited 15 years for this moment. "He's just late," Lucy whispered beside her. "The snow's thick today. His carriage probably... His family lives 4 streets away, Lucy." Clara's voice came out flatter than she intended. She'd been telling herself the same lie for the past hour. Thomas Harrington was never late. Thomas Harrington scheduled his meals by pocket watch. Thomas Harrington had once scolded her for arriving 3 minutes early to their courtship dinner because it suggested eagerness unbefitting a lady. The irony tasted like ash in her mouth. Clara. Her father appeared in the doorway, his blacksmith's hands scrubbed raw for the occasion. Samuel Bennett had never looked comfortable in his Sunday suit, but today he looked worse, like a man walking to a hanging. "There's a boy here, from the Harrington house." Finally, Clara gathered her skirts. "Tell Thomas I'll—" "It ain't Thomas, sweetheart." The way he said it stopped her cold. 24 years of reading her father's weathered face, and she'd never seen that particular expression before. Pity, fear, rage, all tangled together like barbed wire. "Pa!" Samuel stepped aside. Behind him stood a boy of perhaps 12, the Harrington's stable hand clutching his cap in both fists. His eyes were red. He'd been crying. "Miss Bennett." The boy's voice cracked. "Mr. Harrington, Mr. Thomas. I mean, he told me to give you this." He held out an envelope. Clara's hands didn't shake when she took it. Some part of her already knew. Had known maybe since the moment Thomas's mother had looked at her across the dinner table last month and asked ever so sweetly, "And what exactly does your father do again, dear?" The letter was short. 3 lines. "My father has arranged a more suitable match with the Morrison family. I cannot marry beneath my station. Forgive me." No signature. Clara read it twice. 3 times. The words stayed the same. Clara. Lucy's hand touched her shoulder. "What does it say?" She couldn't answer. Couldn't find the breath. The church suddenly seemed very far away, the faces of 200 guests blurring into a single mass of eyes and whispers. They'd come to see a wedding. They were about to see a funeral instead. "He's gone." Clara heard her own voice as if from a great distance. "Thomas is gone." "Gone where? I don't know. I don't—" She looked at the stable boy who flinched like she might strike him. "Where is he?" "Took the morning train to Helena, miss. Left before dawn." The boy's lip trembled. "I'm real sorry. Mr. Thomas, he made me promise not to deliver it until the bells started ringing. Said it would be easier that way." Easier? The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Easier for whom? For Thomas, who wouldn't have to face her. For his father, who wouldn't have to explain to society why his son was marrying a blacksmith's daughter. Not easier for her. Never for her. "I'll kill him." Samuel's voice was quiet, deadly. "I'll ride to Helena and I'll—" "Pa, don't." Clara's hand found his arm, steadied him. Steadied herself. "Don't give them the satisfaction. Clara, you can't just—" "I can." She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. The Bennett family had survived poverty typhoid and the death of her mother when Clara was 9 years old. They would survive this too. Lucy, go tell Reverend Briggs there won't be a wedding today. But everyone's waiting. Then let them wait. Let them see exactly what kind of man Thomas Harrington really is. Lucy fled toward the front of the church, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Clara turned to follow her mother's dress trailing behind her in the dust. She made it 4 steps before her legs gave out. The floor rushed up to meet her. Her knees struck the frozen wood with a crack that seemed to echo through the entire building. The letter crumpled in her fist. Somewhere behind her she heard her father cry out, heard Lucy scream, heard 200 people gasp as one. But all Clara could see was the snow. It drifted through the open doors, catching the light from the windows, settling on her mother's lace like tiny frozen tears. Beautiful, peaceful, as if the whole world hadn't just collapsed around her. I cannot marry beneath my station. She'd known. God help her, she'd always known. Every time Thomas had introduced her as a friend instead of his intended. Every time his mother had sniffed at her homemade dresses. Every time his father had looked through her like she wasn't even there. She'd known, and she'd married herself to hope instead of truth. Clara, get up. Her father's hands were under her arms trying to lift her. Don't let them see you like this. Let them see. The words tasted like blood. She must have bitten her tongue when she fell. Let them see what their golden boy did. Miss Bennett! The voice came from somewhere above her. Male, deep, unfamiliar. Clara didn't look up. She didn't care who it was. The whole town could see her broken on the floor, and she didn't care. Miss Bennett, can you stand? A hand appeared in her line of vision. Large, scarred, calloused. Not the soft hand of a banker's son. This was a working hand, a hand that knew ropes and reins and the weight of honest labor. Clara looked up. The man standing over her was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from weathered oak. A scar ran from his left temple down past his ear, disappearing into the collar of his worn coat. His eyes were brown, almost black, and they held no pity. That more than anything made Clara take his hand. He pulled her to her feet with barely any effort, steadying her when she swayed. His grip was firm, but gentle, and he released her the moment she found her balance. I don't... Clara's voice faltered. I don't know you. Name's Jacob McAllister, ma'am. I run the Broken Creek Ranch about 12 miles north. He spoke slowly, deliberately, like a man who measured every word before spending it. I came to town for supplies, heard the bells, thought I'd see what the occasion was. The occasion? Clara laughed, and the sound was terrible broken. The occasion is that I've been jilted, Mr. McAllister, left at the altar by a man who decided I wasn't good enough for his family name. That's the occasion. Jacob McAllister's expression didn't change. He simply nodded, as if she'd told him the weather had turned cold. I heard. Then you know there's nothing to see here. No wedding, no... I heard what that boy said. His voice cut through hers, quiet but immovable. I heard the letter, and I heard what you said to your father, that you wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Clara stared at him. Were you eavesdropping? Sound carries in a church, ma'am, especially when everyone else is too busy whispering to notice a stranger in the back. He reached up and removed his hat, a battered thing sweat-stained and worn. The gesture seemed oddly formal, almost ceremonial. Miss Bennett, I got a proposal for you. A proposal? Clara's laugh was sharper this time. That's the last thing I need right now, Mr. McAllister. Hear me out. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. You want to show this town what kind of man Harrington is. You want to walk out of here with your head high instead of crawling out like a whipped dog. That's a crude way of putting it. I'm a crude man, but I'm also a practical one. He gestured toward the front of the church, where 200 faces were turned toward them, mouths agape. You got a preacher waiting, you got witnesses, you got a dress, all you're missing is a groom. Clara's heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll marry you, right here, right now, in front of everyone who came to watch Thomas Harrington make you a fool. For a long moment, Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This stranger, this scarred, weathered stranger was offering to marry her, to save her from humiliation. Why? You don't know me, she finally managed. You don't know anything about me. I know you didn't break when most women would have shattered. I know you told your father not to go after Harrington, even though you had every right to want blood. I know you care more about your family's dignity than your own pain. He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. That's enough to know. But marriage isn't a bandage for wounded pride, Mr. McAllister. It's a lifetime commitment. I'm aware of that, ma'am. Then why would you? Because I've been looking for a wife. The words were blunt, unapologetic. Because I need someone to help me run my ranch. Because I'm 32 years old, and I'm tired of coming home to an empty house and eating alone and talking to my horses because there's no one else to talk to. He put his hat back on, settling it low over his brow. And because no woman deserves what that coward did to you. Not today, not ever. Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is insane. Probably. We'd be strangers married to each other. We would. You could be a murderer for all I know, a thief, I was a soldier, Jacob interrupted. Union Army Colorado Cavalry, fought at Glorieta Pass and a dozen other places I'd rather forget. After the war, I worked cattle drives until I saved enough to buy my own land. I don't drink to excess, I don't gamble, and I've never raised a hand to a woman in my life. He met her eyes steadily. You want references. Reverend Briggs has known me since I settled here 5 years ago. Ask him. This is still insane. Miss Bennet. Jacob's voice softened just slightly. In about 2 minutes, you're going to walk out of this church. Either you walk out as Thomas Harrington's abandoned fiancée, the blacksmith's daughter who wasn't good enough, or you walk out as someone's wife. Your choice. Clara turned to look at the congregation. 200 faces stared back at her. She saw pity and some barely concealed satisfaction in others. Margaret Harrington. Thomas's mother sat in the front row, her lips pressed into a thin, triumphant smile. That smile decided it. Pa. Clara didn't take her eyes off Margaret. What do you think? Samuel Bennet stepped forward, placing himself between his daughter and the stranger who just proposed. For a long moment, he studied Jacob McAllister, the scar, the calloused hands, the quiet steadiness in his eyes. You hurt my girl, Samuel said slowly, and I'll forge the knife that kills you myself. Fair enough. You'll provide for her, protect her, on my life. Samuel turned to Clara. His eyes were wet. It's your choice, sweetheart. Whatever you decide, I'll stand behind you. Clara looked at the stranger who wanted to marry her, at her father who trusted her judgment even in madness, at Margaret Harrington, whose smile was beginning to falter. Mr. McAllister, Clara said, and her voice didn't shake. I accept. The murmur that swept through the church was like thunder rolling across the mountains. She can't be serious. Who is that man? Did she say accept? Clara ignored them all. She walked toward the altar, her mother's dress whispering against the wooden floor, and she didn't look back. Behind her she heard Jacob's boots following, steady as a heartbeat. Reverend Briggs stood at the front of the church, his Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. His face had gone the color of old milk. Miss Bennet, he stammered. I don't understand. This gentleman, I can't simply... You know Mr. McAllister, don't you, Reverend? Well, yes, he attends services when he can, but is he a good man? The Reverend glanced at Jacob, who had come to stand beside Clara. Something passed between the two men, recognition perhaps, or understanding. Yes, Briggs said slowly. He is. One of the best I've known. Then marry us. But Miss Bennet, The banns haven't been read and Mr. Harrington. Mr. Harrington, Clara interrupted, sent a 12-year-old boy to tell me he wouldn't be coming. I don't think we need to worry about his feelings. A ripple of shocked laughter moved through the congregation. For the first time, Clara felt something other than despair, a spark of fierce, defiant satisfaction. Reverend, Jacob's voice was calm. Miss Bennet and I are both of sound mind. We're both of age. We're both willing. Is there any legal reason you can't perform this ceremony? Briggs hesitated, looked at Clara, looked at Jacob, looked at the congregation where whispers were building like a storm. No, he admitted. No, there isn't. Then I'd be obliged if you'd get on with it. Clara almost laughed. There was something absurdly refreshing about Jacob McAllister's bluntness, his complete lack of ceremony or pretense. He stood at the altar like a man waiting for his horse to be saddled, patient, practical, utterly unruffled by the chaos around him. Very well. Reverend Briggs opened his Bible with trembling hands. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Wait! The voice came from the front row. Margaret Harrington rose to her feet, her face mottled with fury. This is a mockery. This man is a stranger, a rancher. You cannot seriously expect Mrs. Harrington. Clara turned to face her, and something in her expression made the older woman take a step back. Your son left me standing at this altar with nothing but a 3-line letter and a stable boy's apology. Whatever mockery exists in this church today, he created it, not me. You ungrateful little... Furthermore... Clara's voice rose, cutting through Margaret's sputtering. Your son didn't even have the courage to sign his own name to that letter. He sent a child to deliver his cowardice because he couldn't face me himself. So please, Mrs. Harrington, tell me more about what is and isn't appropriate. Silence. Absolute ringing silence. Margaret Harrington's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Her husband, seated beside her, reached up and pulled her back down into the pew. His face was gray with embarrassment. Clara turned back to the Reverend. Please continue. Reverend Briggs cleared his throat. His hands had stopped shaking. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Clara Ann Bennet and Jacob William McAllister in holy matrimony. The words washed over Clara like water. She heard them responded when required, but her mind was elsewhere, circling the impossible reality of what she was doing. Marrying a stranger, trading one unknown future for another. But when Jacob took her hand to slide a plain silver band onto her finger, produced from his coat pocket, too large, clearly meant for a different woman in a different life. Something shifted in Clara's chest. Where did you get this? She whispered. It was my mother's. Jacob's voice was low, meant only for her. She died when I was young. I've carried it ever since. I can't take... You can. You will. His dark eyes met hers. It's been waiting for someone to wear it. Might as well be you. Clara looked down at the ring on her finger. It was old, slightly tarnished, beautiful in its simplicity. A working woman's ring. Her mother would have loved it. I now pronounce you man and wife. Reverend Briggs's voice rang through the church. You may kiss the bride. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't thought about this part, hadn't let herself think about it. But Jacob was already leaning down, his scarred face inches from hers. If you'd rather not, he murmured. Just do it, before I lose my nerve. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. He kissed her. It was brief, a brush of lips, nothing more, but Clara felt it all the way to her toes. His mouth was warm against the cold, his hand steady on her elbow, and for just a moment the chaos of the day faded away. Then he pulled back and the world rushed in again. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Briggs's voice held a note of wonder. May I present Mr. and Mrs. Jacob McAllister. The reception that followed was by any measure a disaster. Half the guests fled within the first hour, unable to reconcile what they'd witnessed with their expectations. The other half stayed torn between horror and fascination, watching Clara move through her own wedding celebration like a woman walking through a dream. "You should eat something." Jacob appeared at her elbow holding a plate of food. He'd removed his coat at some point, revealing a worn but clean shirt beneath. The scar on his face looked less severe in the lamplight. "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten since breakfast, your sister told me." "Lucy talks too much. She's worried about you." Jacob pressed the plate into her hands. "Eat, you'll need your strength." Clara looked down at the food-cold chicken bread preserved peaches. Her stomach turned. "How can you be so calm?" "About what?" "About everything. We just got married, Mr. McAllister. We don't know each other. We don't—" "Jacob." "What?" "My name is Jacob. Or Jake if you prefer. I reckon we're past formalities now, Mrs. McAllister." The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Mrs. McAllister, not Mrs. Harrington as she'd imagined for the past 6 months. Mrs. McAllister. "This is insane," she whispered. "What have I done?" "You survived." Jacob's voice was matter-of-fact. "That's what you did. Tomorrow you can worry about the rest. Tonight you eat." He turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing alone with a plate of food and 1,000 questions. Her father found her an hour later, sitting on the back steps of the church, watching the snow fall. "Lucy's looking for you," Samuel said, lowering himself onto the step beside her. "Something about cake." "I can't face them anymore, Pa. I can't pretend everything's fine when—" "Then don't." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "Nobody expects you to be happy today, sweetheart. They just expect you to survive it." That's what Jacob said. "Smart man." Samuel paused. "Quiet, though. Don't think he said more than 10 words at the reception. He doesn't waste them." Clara found herself almost smiling. "I think I might like that about him." "Do you know what you're doing?" "Clara? Really?" She turned to look at her father. This man who'd raised her alone, who'd taught her to read and to figure numbers, who'd supported her, even when she'd chosen a banker's son over his objections. "No," she admitted. "I have no idea. But I know what would have happened if I'd walked out of that church unmarried. I know what people would have said. I know what it would have done to Lucy's chances, to your business, too. I don't care about any of that." "I know you don't, but I do." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thomas Harrington was going to destroy me, Pa. Not just today, forever. I would have been the abandoned bride, the blacksmith's daughter who reached too high. Jacob gave me another option. But marriage is exactly what I was going to do anyway, just with a different man." Clara pulled back to look at her father. "At least Jacob was honest with me. He told me why he wanted a wife, practical reasons, sensible reasons. He didn't pretend to love me. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. And that's enough. It's more than Thomas ever gave me." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled Clara close and kissed the top of her head, the way he'd done when she was small. "If he hurts you, you'll forge the knife yourself, I heard." "Damn right I will." The snow was falling harder when Clara and Jacob finally left the church. His wagon waited in the street, a sturdy thing, practical, with her single trunk already loaded in the back. Lucy had packed it that morning, filling it with clothes and books and the few treasures Clara owned. Her whole life reduced to one wooden box. "It's 12 miles to the ranch," Jacob said, helping her up onto the seat. "Maybe 4 hours in this weather. I've got blankets if you get cold." "Thank you." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. The horses, 2 big draft animals patient as stones, leaned into their harnesses without complaint. "Jacob, why did you really do this?" He didn't answer immediately. The wagon lurched forward, wheels crunching on fresh snow, and they left Silver Ridge behind them. "I told you already," he said finally. "I need a wife. You needed a husband." "That's not a reason. That's an excuse." Jacob's jaw tightened. In the gray winter light, the scar on his face looked like a brand. "I had a sister once," he said quietly. "Eliza. She died in the war, not fighting, just caught in the wrong place when the wrong people came through. She was 16. Clara said nothing, just waited. She used to write me letters, long ones full of hope and plans and dreams for when the war ended. In her last letter, she told me she'd met a man, a gentleman from back east. He was going to take her away, give her a better life." Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. "He abandoned her when he found out our family had nothing, left her alone in a town full of strangers. She died 3 weeks later." "Jacob, I couldn't save her." His voice was rough. "I was 500 miles away fighting a war I didn't believe in, and I couldn't save my own sister. But today—" He turned to look at Clara, and his dark eyes held something she couldn't name. "Today I could save you." The wagon rolled on through the falling snow. Clara sat beside her stranger husband, her mother's ring cold on her finger, and felt the first stirrings of something that might have been hope. Whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone. Not. The ranch house emerged from the snow like a ghost. Dark windows, silent walls, a thin curl of smoke rising from the chimney. Clara hadn't realized how cold she was until Jacob helped her down from the wagon, and her legs nearly buckled beneath her. "Steady." His hand caught her elbow. "The cold does that. Takes the feeling right out of you." "I'm fine." "You're shaking." "I said I'm fine." Jacob didn't argue. He simply kept his hand on her arm until she found her balance, then released her without comment. A dog appeared from somewhere, a big gray creature with mismatched eyes, and pressed its nose against Clara's frozen fingers. "That's Ghost. Don't mind him. He thinks everyone who shows up is here to feed him." Clara scratched behind the dog's ears, grateful for something to do with her hands. "He's beautiful." "He's useless. Can't herd cattle worth a damn. But he's good company." The front door swung open, spilling lamplight onto the snow. A woman stood silhouetted in the doorway, short, round, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was a map of lines and creases, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "Jacob McAllister, what in God's name—" She stopped, stared at Clara, stared at the wedding dress beneath Clara's worn coat. "Tell me you didn't." "Martha, this is Clara, my wife." The silence that followed was deafening. "Your wife." Martha's voice could have frozen the snow solid. "You went to town for flour and salt and you came back with a wife." "That's correct." "Have you lost your mind?" "Probably." Jacob guided Clara toward the door. "But it's done now. Can we discuss my sanity inside? My wife is freezing." Martha stepped back, still staring at Clara like she'd grown a second head. The warmth of the house hit Clara like a wallfire crackling in the hearth, the smell of wood smoke and something savory cooking, the blessed relief of being out of the wind. "Sit." Martha pointed at a chair by the fire. "Before you fall down." Clara sat. She was too exhausted to argue, too numb to feel embarrassed. The day's events had drained everything from her, every emotion, every thought, every ounce of strength. All that remained was a hollow shell in a wedding dress warming herself by a stranger's fire. "I'll put on coffee," Martha said grimly. "And then, Jacob McAllister, you're going to explain to me exactly how you managed to get yourself married between breakfast and supper." She disappeared into what must have been the kitchen. Jacob pulled off his coat and hung it by the door, then knelt to add another log to the fire. In the flickering light, the scar on his face seemed to pulse with shadows. "Martha's been with me since I built this place," he said, not looking at Clara. "She speaks her mind, loudly, often. I noticed. She'll warm up to you, eventually." Clara stared at the flames. "And if she doesn't, then she'll have to find another employer. You're my wife. This is your home now. Anyone who can't accept that can leave." The words were simple, matter-of-fact, but something in them made Clara's chest tighten. Your home now. She'd never had a home that was truly hers. Her father's house had been her father's. Thomas's house would have been Thomas's. But don't, she said quietly. Don't what? Don't make promises you can't keep. I know what this is. I know why you married me. You don't have to pretend. I'm not pretending anything. Jacob turned to face her, still crouching by the fire. I told you what I wanted. A wife, a partner, someone to share this life with. That's you now, for better or worse. And I meant those vows, Clara, every word. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But Thomas had made promises too. Thomas had looked into her eyes and told her she was everything he wanted. Thomas had... You're crying. Clara touched her face. Her fingers came away wet. I'm sorry. I can't. Don't apologize. Jacob rose and moved toward the kitchen. I'll get you something to eat. You need food and rest. Everything else can wait until morning. He left her alone with the fire and the dog and the tears she couldn't seem to stop. The first night passed in a blur. Martha showed Clara to a small bedroom at the back of the house. The guest room, she called it with pointed emphasis on guest, and left her with a basin of warm water and a promise of breakfast at dawn. Jacob sleeps in the main bedroom, Martha said from the doorway. I assume you'll want your privacy. Yes, thank you. Martha's eyes traveled over Clara's wedding dress, crumpled and stained from the day's events. I'll bring you something else to wear tomorrow. Can't have you stumbling around in that. I have clothes in my trunk. That trunk won't be unloaded until morning. The men are asleep, and I'm too old to be hauling luggage in a blizzard. Martha paused, her expression softening just slightly. Get some rest, girl. Whatever happened today, and I intend to find out exactly what that was, you look like you've been through a war. She closed the door, leaving Clara alone. The room was small but clean, a narrow bed, a wooden chair, a window that looked out onto nothing but white. Clara sat on the edge of the mattress and tried to feel something, anything. But there was only emptiness, vast and cold as the Montana winter. She slept in her wedding dress because she had nothing else, and if she dreamed of Thomas Harrington's face dissolving into snow, she didn't remember it by morning. Dawn came gray and bitter. Clara woke to the sound of voices, male, rough, unfamiliar, and the smell of coffee so strong it seemed to seep through the walls. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before the previous day crashed back over her like a wave. Married. She was married, to a stranger, in a house she'd never seen, surrounded by people she didn't know. You going to sleep all day? Martha's voice cut through the door, sharp as a blade. Clara scrambled upright, wincing at the stiffness in her neck and shoulders. I'm awake. Good. Breakfast is ready, and my patience isn't infinite. By the time Clara made it to the kitchen, still wearing the ruined wedding dress, her hair a disaster, the room was full of men. 4 of them seated around a rough wooden table, shoveling eggs and bacon into their mouths like they hadn't eaten in weeks. They all stopped when she appeared in the doorway. Morning, ma'am. The speaker was a tall black man with graying hair and kind eyes. He rose from his seat and removed his hat, a gesture the other men quickly copied. I'm Elijah Crow, foreman here at Broken Creek. Clara Bennett. She stopped. Clara McAllister. We heard. Elijah's smile was warm. News travels fast, even in a blizzard. Welcome to the ranch, Mrs. McAllister. Thank you. These are the hands, Pete Samuel and young Daniel. Elijah gestured to each man in turn. We've been with the boss 3 years or more. Good men, all of us. Clara nodded, overwhelmed. It's nice to meet you. Don't just stand there letting all the heat out. Martha appeared at Clara's elbow, pressing a cup of coffee into her hands. Sit, eat. You look like death warmed over. The men made room for her at the table, shifting aside with awkward courtesy. Clara found herself seated between Elijah and the youngest hand, Daniel, barely more than a boy, with a spray of freckles across his nose and ears that turned pink when she looked at him. Is Jacob... Clara hesitated. Is Mr. McAllister? Been up since 4, Elijah said. Storm damaged some fencing in the north pasture. He's out checking on the cattle. In this weather? Cattle don't care about weather, ma'am. They need tending regardless. Elijah's tone was gentle. The boss will be back by midday most likely. Said to tell you to make yourself at home. Make yourself at home. As if it were that simple. As if she could just slip into this life like a hand into a glove, like she belonged here among these strangers who knew her husband better than she did. Thank you, Clara managed. I'll try. The morning passed slowly. Martha produced a plain dress from somewhere, belonged to Jacob's mother, God rest her, and Clara changed gratefully out of her ruined wedding gown. The dress was slightly too large, but serviceable. Practical. Nothing like the silks and satins Thomas had promised her. She found herself drawn to the kitchen where Martha was kneading bread with the kind of force that suggested she was imagining someone's face beneath her fists. Can I help? Martha didn't look up. You know how to cook? Some. My mother died when I was 9. I learned what I could. The older woman's hands stilled, just for a moment. That's hard, losing a mother young. It was. Jacob lost his mother too, and his father. Fever took them both when he was 16. Martha resumed her kneading. He doesn't talk about it, doesn't talk about much, truth be told. But I thought you should know. He told me, a little. Did he? Martha's eyebrows rose. That's more than most get. Jacob keeps his past locked up tighter than a bank vault. She gestured at the vegetables piled by the sink. If you want to be useful, you can peel those potatoes. Stew for dinner. Clara picked up the knife, grateful for something to do. For several minutes, they worked in silence. Martha's fists pounding the dough, Clara's blade scraping steadily across potato skins. What happened yesterday? Martha finally asked. The truth. Clara's hands stilled. What did Jacob tell you? That you needed a husband and he needed a wife. That some fool abandoned you at the altar and he stepped in. Martha fixed her with a piercing stare. But that doesn't explain why a girl like you, pretty young, clearly educated, would marry a man she'd never met, just to spite some other man who wronged her. It wasn't spite. Then what was it? Clara set down the knife. How could she explain it? The humiliation, the fury, the desperate need to salvage something, anything from the wreckage of her careful plans. It was survival, she said quietly. You don't know what it's like for a woman in my position. A blacksmith's daughter who dared to reach above her station. If I'd walked out of that church unmarried, I would have been ruined. Not just socially, though that too, but in every way that matters. My father's business, my sister's prospects, my own chance at any kind of respectable life. And Jacob offered you a way out. He offered me a chance to hold my head up, to leave that church as someone's wife instead of everyone's cautionary tale. Clara met Martha's eyes. I know it sounds calculated. I know it sounds cold. But I didn't have the luxury of sentiment yesterday. I had to choose between drowning and grabbing the hand that reached for me. Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. At least you're honest. I can work with honest. Does that mean you'll stop looking at me like I'm here to rob the silver? A ghost of a smile crossed Martha's weathered face. Don't push your luck, girl. Trust takes time. I understand. Good. Martha returned to her bread. Now finish those potatoes. I don't have all day. Jacob returned at noon, covered in snow and looking exhausted. He paused in the doorway when he saw Clara at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling between her hands. You're up. I've been up for hours. Martha put you to work. I asked to help. Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or approval. He pulled off his snow-covered coat and hung it by the fire. Storm took out about 100 yards of fencing, lost one calf, but the rest of the herd is accounted for. I'm sorry, about the calf. It happens. He crossed to the table and sat down heavily. Part of ranching. You lose some no matter how careful you are. Martha appeared with a bowl of stew and a thick slice of bread. Eat, you look half dead. Thanks, Martha. Your concern is touching. Don't sass me. I'm too old for sass. She retreated to the kitchen, leaving Clara and Jacob alone for the first time since the previous night. The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. "Did you sleep?" Jacob asked finally. "Some. The guest room is small. I can have the men build something more suitable." "It's fine, really." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "Jacob, we need to talk." "I figured we would." Not about us. About this." She gestured at the room around them. "About what you expect from me. What my role is supposed to be." Jacob set down his spoon. "What do you mean?" "I mean I can't just sit here and be decorative. That's what Thomas wanted, a pretty wife to hang on his arm and smile at his business associates. If that's what you're looking for, it's not." "Then what?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I told you I needed a partner. I meant it. This ranch." He shook his head. "It's not in good shape, Clara. I've got land, I've got cattle, I've got good men, but I'm drowning in debt and I don't have the head for figures that I need to dig myself out." "Debt." 3 bad winters in a row, lost more cattle than I could afford, had to borrow to keep the operation running. His jaw tightened. "I've been treading water for 2 years. If this winter goes badly, I'll lose everything." Clara stared at him. "Why didn't you tell me this yesterday? Would it have changed your answer?" She thought about it. The church, the letter, Margaret Harrington's triumphant smile. "No," she admitted. "It wouldn't have." "Then it didn't matter." "Not then." Jacob met her eyes. "It matters now. You deserve to know what you've married into. This isn't the life Thomas Harrington would have given you. It's hard, it's uncertain, and there's no guarantee we'll come out the other side." "I don't care about the life Thomas would have given me. He didn't give me anything except humiliation and 3 lines in a letter." Clara leaned forward. "You said you're bad with figures. What exactly does that mean?" "Means I can barely keep track of what I'm owed, let alone what I owe. Numbers swim around on the page like fish in a stream. Always have." His voice was gruff, embarrassed. "My mother used to handle the accounts when I was young. After she died, I just did the best I could." "Do you have ledger's records?" "Such as they are, in my study." "Why?" Clara stood up. "Show me." The study was a small room off the main hall, cluttered with papers and leather-bound books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Jacob lit a lamp and gestured at the desk, a massive oak thing buried under stacks of receipts, invoices, and what might have been correspondence. "I told you it was bad." Clara approached the desk slowly, her eyes scanning the chaos. She picked up a receipt at random dated 3 months ago for feed supplies, and then another, this one, a promissory note from a bank in Helena. "How much do you owe total?" "I don't know exactly. That's part of the problem." "And how much are you owed from cattle sales services, anything?" "I don't know that either." Clara closed her eyes, breathed deeply. When she opened them again, her expression was calm, focused. "My father is a blacksmith. Not a rich man, but a good one. He taught me to keep his books when I was 12 years old. I've been managing his accounts ever since." "You can do figures. I can do more than figures. I can organize, track, project plan." She met his eyes steadily. "If you let me, I can fix this." Jacob stared at her for a long moment. Something was working behind his eyes. Doubt maybe, or hope, or some complicated mixture of both. "You do that? Help with the accounts?" "It's not charity. This is my home now too. You said so yourself. If the ranch fails, I fail with it." Clara pulled a chair up to the desk and sat down, reaching for the nearest stack of papers. "Now, start from the beginning. Tell me everything." They worked through the afternoon and into the evening. Clara sorted receipts, while Jacob explained the ranch's operations, which hands were paid, which suppliers extended credit, which neighbors owed money for breeding services or hay. It was painstaking, tedious work, but Clara found herself energized by it. This was something she could do. Something tangible, useful. Not smiling and nodding at dinner parties. Not pretending to be interested in society gossip. This was real. By the time Martha called them for supper, Clara had reduced the chaos on the desk to neat stacks organized by date and category. It was only a beginning, but it was something. "You've got a gift," Jacob said, watching her straighten the last pile of papers. "I've got patience, and good teachers." Clara rubbed her eyes. "The situation isn't as bad as you think. You're owed more than you realize. There are at least 6 outstanding debts from last year's sales that were never collected. If we can get that money in, we—" She stopped, flushed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to assume—" "Don't apologize." Jacob's voice was quiet. "I like the sound of it. We." Their eyes met across the cluttered desk. For a moment, something crackled in the air between them, not quite warmth, but the possibility of warmth. The first fragile shoots of trust pushing through frozen ground. "Mrs. McAllister." Martha's voice cut through the moment. "Supper, now, before I feed your portion to the dog." Clara looked away first. "Coming, Martha." She gathered her skirts and moved toward the door, but Jacob's voice stopped her. "Clara." "Yes. Thank you. For today. For—" He shook his head. "Just thank you." Clara nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and fled to the kitchen. That night, lying in her small guest room, Clara found herself thinking not of Thomas Harrington, or the wedding that wasn't, but of ledger books and outstanding debts, and the look in Jacob's eyes when he'd said, "we." It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship, not yet. But it was something. And in the frozen heart of a Montana winter, something was more than she'd dared to hope for. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Clara rose early, breakfasted with the hands, and spent her mornings in Jacob's study, slowly untangling the financial mess he'd created. In the afternoons, she helped Martha with household tasks, cooking, mending, cleaning. In the evenings, she and Jacob sat by the fire and talked their conversations, growing longer and more comfortable with each passing night. "Tell me about your mother," Clara said one evening, 2 weeks into their strange marriage. "What was she like?" Jacob was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "Strong, stubborn. She had to be married to my father. He was a dreamer, always chasing the next scheme, the next opportunity. She's the one who kept us fed, kept a roof over our heads." "You loved her." "More than anything." His voice was rough. "When she died, I thought I'd die too. Just stop breathing and follow her wherever she'd gone. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." He stared into the fire. "Sometimes I wonder if that makes me strong or just too stubborn to give up. Maybe both." He turned to look at her, then really look, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. This man, this quiet, scarred, complicated man, had depths she was only beginning to fathom. "What about you?" Jacob asked. "What was your mother like?" "I barely remember her. She died when I was 9 consumption. But I remember her hands." Clara smiled softly. "She had the most beautiful hands. Long fingers, always moving, always creating something. She could make a dress from scraps of nothing. Could coax flowers from the deadest soil. You have her hands." Clara looked down at her fingers stained with ink from the ledgers. "Do I? I noticed the first day, at the church, when you were holding that letter." Jacob's voice was careful. "Beautiful hands." Heat rose to Clara's cheeks. "Jacob, I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I'm just saying what I noticed, that's all." They sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Charged, expectant, like the air before a storm. "We should sleep," Clara finally said, rising from her chair. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "Clara." She paused at the door. "I'm glad you're here." His voice was low. "I know this isn't what you planned. I know I'm not what you wanted. But I'm glad you're here." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm glad too," she whispered. And she found, somewhat to her surprise, that she meant it. 3 weeks after their wedding, Clara made a discovery that changed everything. She'd been deep in the ledgers, tracking down a discrepancy that had been nagging at her for days, when she found it a series of payments to a name she didn't recognize. Franklin Garrett. Substantial sums paid monthly going back over 2 years. Jacob. She found him in the barn checking on a mare that was due to foal. "Who is Franklin Garrett?" Jacob's face went pale. "Where did you hear that name?" "In the ledgers. You've been paying him hundreds of dollars every month, but there's no record of what for no services rendered, no goods received." Clara held up the papers. "What is this?" For a long moment, Jacob didn't answer. He stood there, his hand on the mare's neck, his expression closed and unreadable. "It's none of your concern." "None of my—" Clara stepped closer. "You asked me to fix your finances. You asked me to be your partner. How can I do that if you're hiding things from me?" "Some things aren't meant to be shared." "Like what? Like the fact that you're bleeding money to some mysterious man for no apparent reason?" Her voice rose. "What is he? Jacob, a blackmailer? A creditor? What do you owe him that's worth bankrupting yourself over? Drop it, Clara." "No." "I said drop it." His voice cracked through the barn like a whip. The mare startled, rolling her eyes in fear. Jacob took a deep breath, visibly forcing himself to calm down. "Please, just leave it alone." Clara stared at him. The man she'd started to trust. The man she'd started to feel something for. And she realized with cold certainty that she didn't know him at all. "Fine," she said quietly. "Keep your secrets." She turned and walked back to the house, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard Jacob call her name, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. What had she married into? And how many more secrets was her husband hiding behind those dark, wounded eyes? 3 days passed without Clara speaking more than necessary to Jacob. She continued her work with the ledgers, took her meals with the household, performed her duties as expected. But the easy warmth that had been building between them had frozen solid, and neither seemed to know how to thaw it. Martha noticed, of course. Martha noticed everything. "You two have a fight." Clara didn't look up from the potatoes she was peeling. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play games with me, girl. The air between you and Jacob's been cold enough to freeze whiskey." Martha wiped her hands on her apron. "What happened? Ask him." "I'm asking you." Clara set down the knife. "I found something in the ledgers. Payments to a man named Franklin Garrett. Hundreds of dollars every month for over 2 years. When I asked Jacob about it, he told me to drop it." Martha's face went still. "You found those? You know about them?" "I know Jacob has his reasons for everything he does. I know he's not a man who wastes money on foolishness." Martha's voice was careful, measured. "And I know some wounds run too deep to talk about easily." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you." Martha picked up her own knife and began slicing carrots. "If you want to know about Franklin Garrett, you'll have to wait until Jacob's ready to tell you. Pushing him won't help. And if he's never ready, then you'll have to decide whether you can live with not knowing." Martha's eyes met hers. "Marriage is full of things we don't know about each other, Clara. Full of secrets and scars and pieces we keep hidden. The question isn't whether those things exist. The question is whether you trust the person enough to believe they have good reasons for keeping them." Clara had no answer for that. The blizzard hit on the 4th day. It came without warning, a wall of white that descended on the ranch like divine judgment. One moment the sky was gray and heavy. The next, the world disappeared entirely. Wind screamed across the plains, driving snow so thick that a person could get lost between the house and the barn. "Everyone inside." Jacob's voice cut through the howling wind. "Leave the livestock, they'll survive. Get the men inside now." Clara watched from the kitchen window as shadows emerged from the whiteness. Elijah first half-carrying young Daniel, who'd slipped on the ice and twisted his ankle. Then Pete and Samuel, their faces raw and red from the cold, and finally Jacob bringing up the rear counting heads like a shepherd with his flock. They tumbled through the back door in a rush of frozen air and snow. Martha was already moving, shoving hot coffee into frozen hands, wrapping Daniel's ankle with practiced efficiency. "How long?" Clara asked Jacob. "Could be hours, could be days." He was breathing hard snow melting in his dark hair. "I've seen storms like this last a week." "The cattle?" "Will have to fend for themselves. Nothing we can do now." He met her eyes for the first time in days. "I'm sorry. I know you wanted to talk more about... It doesn't matter right now." "It does matter." "Clara." A crash from outside made them both jump. Something hitting the side of the house, a branch maybe, or debris carried by the wind. "Later," Clara said firmly. "Right now, we focus on surviving." The first night of the storm passed in tense wakefulness. No one slept properly. The wind was too loud, the house groaning under its assault. Clara found herself in the main room with the others wrapped in blankets, watching the fire and listening to the world try to tear itself apart outside. "I've seen worse," Elijah said quietly. "Back in '64, there was a storm that lasted 9 days, killed half the cattle in the territory." "That's not helpful, Elijah," Martha snapped. "Wasn't trying to be helpful, just saying we'll get through this." Sometime after midnight, Jacob appeared at Clara's elbow with a cup of coffee. "You should try to sleep." "So should you." "I can't." He sat down beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Never could sleep in storms. Too much noise in my head." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "What kind of noise?" "Old noise. War noise." He was quiet for a moment. "You ever hear about Glorieta Pass?" "The battle, I read about it." "Reading about it isn't the same as being there." Jacob stared into the fire. "I was 19. Thought I was a man, thought I knew what fighting meant. I didn't know anything." "What happened?" "We won. That's what the history books say. Union victory at Glorieta Pass. What they don't say is what it cost." His voice dropped. "I killed my first man there. Boy, really. Couldn't have been more than 17. Came at me with a bayonet and I..." He stopped, swallowed. I can still see his face. Every time I close my eyes in a storm like this, I see his face. Clara didn't know what to say. So she did the only thing that felt right. She reached over and took his hand. Jacob's fingers tightened around hers. "I'm not a good man, Clara. I've done things I'll answer for someday. Things that keep me up at night. You're a better man than you think. You don't know. I know you stepped forward when everyone else stayed silent. I know you gave me a home when I had nothing. I know you treat your men fairly and your animals kindly, and you've never once made me feel like less than what I am." Clara squeezed his hand. "Whatever else you've done, whatever secrets you're keeping, those things matter too." Jacob turned to look at her. In the firelight, his scars seemed softer, his eyes less guarded. "You really believe that?" "I'm trying to." They sat in silence after that, hands still intertwined while the storm raged on outside. And somewhere in that long, dark night, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally broke, the world outside was transformed, buried under feet of snow, silent and white, and utterly changed. The men went out immediately to check on the cattle, and the news they brought back was grim. Lost about 30 head. Elijah reported his face drawn with exhaustion. Found them in the north pasture frozen solid. Rest of the herd is scattered but alive. 30 head. Jacob's voice was hollow. We couldn't afford to lose 30 head. Clara did the math in her head. 30 cattle at current prices. It was thousands of dollars money. They didn't have losses they couldn't absorb. The ranch, already struggling, had just taken a blow that might be fatal. There's more, boss. Elijah glanced at Clara, then back to Jacob. Found tracks in the snow, horse tracks fresh. Someone was out riding during the storm. That's impossible. No one could survive. I know what I saw, and there's something else. Elijah reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of paper crumpled and water-stained. Found this nailed to the fence post by the road. Jacob took the paper, read it, and his face went white as the snow outside. What is it? Clara stepped forward. Jacob, what does it say? He handed her the paper without a word. Your debt is overdue. Pay by month's end, or lose everything. This is your final warning. F.G. Franklin Garrett. Jacob. Clara's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Who is this man? What does he have on you? For a long moment, Jacob didn't answer. He stood there, staring at the paper in her hands, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Tell her. Martha had appeared in the doorway, her face grim. She deserves to know. She's your wife. Martha. Tell her, Jacob, or I will. The silence stretched. Then Jacob let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded inside him. Franklin Garrett owns me, he said quietly. Has for 3 years. Owns you. What does that mean? After the war, I came home to nothing. My parents dead. Our farm sold for debts. I had the clothes on my back and a mustering out payment that barely covered a week's food. Jacob's voice was flat, emotionless. I worked cattle drives for 6 years, saved every penny. Finally had enough to buy my own land. This land. Part of it. The original parcel, 300 acres, the house, the basic operation. But it wasn't enough. Not enough cattle, not enough grazing land. I needed to expand if I was going to survive. Clara felt cold dread settling in her stomach. And Garrett. He's a speculator from back east. Buys up land and assets, lends money to desperate men at rates that would make a bank blush. I went to him because no one else would take the risk. Jacob laughed bitterly. He was happy to help, bought up the land around me, leased it to me cheap. Extended credit for cattle equipment, everything I needed. All I had to do was pay him back with interest. How much interest? Enough that no matter how much I pay, I never get ahead. The debt just grows. Like a cancer. He finally met her eyes. I've given him thousands of dollars, Clara. Every good year I've had every profit I've made, it all goes to Franklin Garrett. And I still owe more than when I started. Clara's mind was racing. That's usury. It's illegal. Try proving it. Garrett's contracts are airtight. He has lawyers' connections, judges in his pocket. Men have tried to fight him before. They end up losing everything. So you just keep paying forever? I keep paying, or he takes the ranch. Takes everything I've built. Jacob's voice cracked. I couldn't let that happen. Not after everything I survived to get here. Not after your sister. The words were out before Clara could stop them. This is about Eliza. Jacob flinched like she'd struck him. How do you... You told me, on our wedding day, about how she died, how you couldn't save her. Clara stepped closer. This ranch isn't just land to you. It's proof that you survived. Proof that what she went through meant something. Don't. You've been carrying this alone for 3 years. Paying off a debt you'll never clear, working yourself half to death, refusing to ask for help because you think you deserve to suffer. Tears were building in Clara's eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. Because I wanted you to think you'd married a successful rancher, not a fool drowning in debt to a vulture. Because... He stopped. Because what? Because I didn't want to lose you. He looked at her, then really looked, and Clara saw everything he'd been hiding. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that somehow against all odds, things might work out. Not when I'd just found you. The kitchen fell silent. Martha dabbed at her eyes with her apron. Elijah quietly gathered the other hands and shepherded them outside. Clara stood before her husband, this broken, proud, impossible man, and made a decision. "Show me the contracts." "What?" "The contracts, Garrett's paperwork, whatever documents you have." Her voice was steady now. "You married a blacksmith's daughter who learned to keep books at 12 years old. Let me see what we're dealing with." They worked through the night. Jacob produced the contracts, a stack of papers thick as a Bible filled with legal language that seemed designed to confuse and intimidate. Clara read every word, cross-referenced every figure, traced every payment through the ledgers she'd already organized. By dawn, she had found what she was looking for. Here. She pointed to a clause buried deep in the third page of the original agreement. The interest rate resets every year based on prevailing market conditions. But look at this. Garrett has been calculating it wrong. He's been charging you compound interest on amounts that should have been simple interest. I don't understand. He's been stealing from you, Jacob. Legally, maybe the language is murky enough to defend, but the numbers don't lie. Clara pulled out her calculations. Based on what you've actually paid versus what you should owe, he's overcharged you by almost $2,000 over 3 years. Jacob stared at the numbers. That can't be right." "It is. I've checked it 3 times. Clara met his eyes. "If we can prove this to a judge, a fair judge one Garrett doesn't own, we can renegotiate the debt, maybe even clear it entirely. There are no fair judges in Montana Territory. Garrett has. Then we find one outside the territory. We write to Helena to Washington if we have to. We find someone who will listen." Clara grabbed his hands. "Jacob, this is the first good news you've had in 3 years. Don't give up now." Something was changing in Jacob's face, the hopelessness cracking light seeping through. "You'd do that fight Garrett with me. I married you. That means your fights are my fights." Clara squeezed his hands. "Besides, I have a personal interest in keeping this ranch solvent. I've gotten rather attached to my kitchen." The sound that escaped Jacob was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Clara held him back, and for the first time since their strange wedding day, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The letter to Helena went out with the first rider who could get through the snow. Clara wrote it herself, laying out the case in clear, precise language that left no room for misinterpretation. Jacob added his signature, and Elijah witnessed it. Then they waited. The days after the storm were consumed with recovery, gathering scattered cattle, repairing damaged fences, assessing losses. Everyone worked from dawn to dusk, including Clara, who discovered muscles she didn't know she had and blisters in places she'd rather not mention. "You don't have to do this," Jacob said, watching her haul water to a group of calves that had been separated from their mothers. "Martha can. Martha is 60 years old and has been working harder than any of us. I'm young and healthy and perfectly capable of carrying water." Clara wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Stop treating me like porcelain." "I'm not." "You are. You've been watching me like you expect me to shatter ever since I found those contracts." She set down the bucket and faced him squarely. "I'm not fragile, Jacob. I never was, and I don't need protection from hard work or hard truths." Jacob was quiet for a moment. Then slowly he nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just hand me that other bucket." Something like a smile crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am." They worked side by side for the rest of the afternoon, and if their hands touched more often than strictly necessary, neither of them mentioned it. A week after the storm, they had a visitor. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard the horse approach. She looked out the window and saw a figure in a fine wool coat picking his way through the snow toward the house, his breath fogging in the cold air. Her heart stopped. She knew that coat. She knew that walk. She knew the carefully styled hair and the thin aristocratic face and the way he held himself like the world owed him something. Thomas Harrington had come to Montana. "Clara." Martha appeared at her elbow. "You've gone white as a sheet. What's—" She followed Clara's gaze to the window. "Lord have mercy. Is that—" "Yes." "What's he doing here?" "I don't know." Clara's hands were shaking. "But I intend to find out." She was at the door before Thomas could knock, yanking it open with more force than necessary. He stumbled back, clearly surprised by her sudden appearance. "Clara." His voice was the same smooth, cultured, confident. "You look well." "What are you doing here, Thomas?" "I came to see you, to explain." He glanced past her into the house. "May I come in?" "No." His polished expression flickered. "Clara, please. I've traveled over 100 miles in terrible conditions. Surely you can spare me a few minutes." "You couldn't spare me a few minutes on our wedding day. You sent a stable boy with a 3-line letter." Clara's voice was ice. "Why should I give you anything?" "Because I made a mistake." Thomas stepped forward, his eyes beseeching. "A terrible mistake. I was weak, Clara. My father pressured me, threatened to cut me off if I didn't marry Adelaide Morrison. I didn't have the courage to stand up to him. And now Adelaide has shown her true colors. She's cold, Clara, calculating, nothing like you." He reached for her hand. "I've thought of nothing but you since the moment I left. The way you laughed, the way you looked at me, the way you made me feel like I could be a better man. I was a fool to let you go." Clara stared at the man she had once imagined spending her life with. He was as handsome as ever. Fine features, expensive clothes, every hair in place despite the long journey. And she felt nothing. "You're too late, Thomas." "Clara, I'm married." "I know, to some rancher who had to rescue you from embarrassment." Thomas's voice took on an edge. "That's not a real marriage, it's a business arrangement. Come back with me, Clara. I'll get you an annulment. I'll make everything right." "There's nothing to make right." Clara pulled her hand free. "I'm exactly where I want to be." "In this—" Thomas gestured at the house, the ranch, the snow-covered land around them. "Living like a peasant in the middle of nowhere, Clara. You deserve better than this." "You don't get to tell me what I deserve." The voice came from behind her. Clara turned to find Jacob standing in the doorway, his face hard as granite. "You must be Harrington." Jacob stepped forward, placing himself beside Clara. "I've heard a lot about you. And you're the convenient stranger who swooped in to save my fiancée." Thomas's lip curled. Very heroic. But let's be honest about what this is: a desperate woman making a desperate choice. She doesn't belong here. She belongs wherever she chooses to be, and she's chosen here. Has she? Thomas looked at Clara. "Is that true? Are you honestly telling me you'd rather stay in this frozen wasteland with a scarred stranger than come back to civilization with me?" Clara thought about Silver Ridge, about the comfortable house Thomas would have given her, the respectable position, the easy life. And then she thought about this ranch, the hard work, the uncertain future, the man beside her who had shown her more honesty in weeks than Thomas had in months of courtship. "Yes," she said clearly. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Thomas's face contorted. "You're making a mistake, Clara. A terrible mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." She stepped back toward Jacob, feeling his hand settle on the small of her back. "Goodbye, Thomas. Don't come here again." "Clara." "The lady asked you to leave." Jacob's voice was quiet, but carried an edge of warning. "I suggest you do it." For a moment, Thomas looked like he might argue. Then his eyes traveled from Clara's resolute face to Jacob's immovable presence, and something in him seemed to deflate. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. both of you." "I regret a lot of things," Clara replied. "You won't be one of them." Thomas turned and walked back to his horse without another word. Clara and Jacob stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared over the ridge and was gone. "You all right?" Jacob asked quietly. Clara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Yes. Actually, yes. I am." "You could have gone with him, back to the life you planned." "I know. Why didn't you—" Clara turned to face him. This man who had given her shelter and purpose, and something she was only beginning to recognize as hope. "Because that life wasn't real," she said. "It was a fantasy I'd constructed about who I was supposed to be. This—" She gestured at the ranch at him, at everything around them. "This is real. Hard and uncertain and nothing like what I imagined, but real." Jacob reached up and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cold cheek. "Clara McAllister," he said slowly, "you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." And when he kissed her, really kissed her, not the brief brush of lips from their wedding day, but something deep and true and full of promise, Clara kissed him back. Behind them, Martha cleared her throat loudly. "If you two are done, there's work to be done, and I'm not serving dinner to a house full of people making eyes at each other like lovesick children." They broke apart, both flushing, but neither could stop smiling. "Coming, Martha," Clara called. As they walked back into the house together, hand in hand, Clara realized something had changed. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience anymore. This was becoming something real. The response from Helena came 3 weeks after Thomas's departure. Clara was in the study reconciling the month's accounts when Elijah rode in with the mail. She heard him talking to Jacob outside, heard their voices drop to urgent murmurs, and her heart began to pound. "Clara." Jacob appeared in the doorway, an envelope in his hands. His face was unreadable. "It's from Judge Harrison, the Territorial Court." She set down her pen and rose, her legs suddenly unsteady. "What does it say?" "I haven't opened it." "Then open it." Jacob looked at the envelope like it might bite him. Clara crossed the room and took it from his hands. "Together," she said quietly. "We do this together." She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Jacob read over her shoulder, his breath warm against her hair. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. McAllister, I have reviewed the documentation you provided regarding your financial arrangement with Franklin Garrett. Your wife's analysis is thorough, and upon examination, by my clerk, appears to be correct. Mr. Garrett has indeed been calculating interest in a manner inconsistent with the terms of your original agreement. This matter warrants further investigation. I am scheduling a hearing for the 15th of next month at the Territorial Courthouse in Helena. Mr. Garrett has been notified and is required to appear with all relevant documentation. I make no promises regarding the outcome, but I will tell you this: if your claims prove accurate, you may have grounds not only for debt restructuring, but for recovery of overpayments. Sincerely, Judge William Harrison, Montana Territorial Court. Clara read it twice, 3 times. The words stayed the same. "We have a hearing," she breathed. "Jacob, we have a hearing." "I see that." A real judge, looking at Garrett's contracts, looking at what he's done. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. This could be it. This could be the end of it. Jacob's expression was cautious, guarded. "Don't get your hopes up. Garrett has connections everywhere. He could have gotten to this judge already. Or maybe he hasn't. Maybe Judge Harrison is one of the honest ones." Clara grabbed his hands. "We have to try, Jacob. We have to at least try." "I know." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I know we do." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the letter crushed between them. And Clara allowed herself for the first time to hope. The weeks leading up to the hearing were consumed with preparation. Clara organized every scrap of documentation they had: contracts, receipts, ledger entries, her own calculations. She created charts and summaries that even someone with no head for figures could understand. She practiced explaining the discrepancies until she could do it in her sleep. "You should have been a lawyer," Jacob said one evening, watching her arrange papers into neat stacks. "Women can't be lawyers. Women can't do a lot of things, supposedly. Doesn't seem to stop you." Clara smiled despite her exhaustion. "Flattery won't make me finish any faster." It wasn't flattery. It was an observation. Jacob crossed the room and put his hands on her shoulders, kneading the knots that had formed there from hours hunched over the desk. "You need to rest. I need to finish. The hearing is in 4 days. You've been working yourself to the bone for weeks. If you collapse before we get there, none of this preparation will matter." Clara leaned back into his touch, letting her eyes close. He was right, of course. She was running on coffee and determination, and both were wearing thin. "1 more hour," she murmured. "Then I'll rest." "You said that 2 hours ago." "I mean it this time." Jacob's hands stilled on her shoulders. "Clara?" "Whatever happens in Helena, whatever the judge decides, I want you to know something." His voice was quiet, serious. "You've already given me more than I ever expected, more than I deserved. Even if we lose everything, that won't change." Clara opened her eyes and turned to look at him. His face was half in shadow, the scar on his cheek darker in the lamplight. But his eyes were full of something she was only beginning to understand. "We're not going to lose," she said firmly. "Not this time." "I believe you." And the strange thing was, he sounded like he meant it. The journey to Helena took 2 days by wagon. They left the ranch in Elijah's capable hands and traveled through a landscape slowly waking from winter-brown grass, poking through melting snow, the first brave hints of green appearing on the hillsides. "I've never been to Helena," Clara admitted as they camped the first night wrapped in blankets by a small fire. "It's just a town. Bigger than Silver Ridge, fancier in some parts, but still just a town. You've been, once, after the war." Jacob poked at the fire with a stick. "Came through on my way west. Didn't stay long." "Why not?" "Too many people. Too much noise." He shrugged. "I wanted quiet. Space. A place where I could hear myself think." Clara understood that. After the chaos of the wedding, the confusion of the first weeks, she had come to appreciate the ranch's isolation. There was something purifying about the silence, the vast emptiness that stretched in every direction. "Jacob," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything." "That night during the storm, when you told me about the war." She hesitated. "You said you'd done things you would answer for someday. Things that kept you up at night." His jaw tightened. "I remember." "Is Garrett part of that, the debt? The payments, is that your way of punishing yourself?" The question hung in the cold air between them. For a long moment Jacob didn't answer. "Maybe," he finally said. "I don't know. After Eliza died, after I came home to nothing." He shook his head. "I felt like I deserved to suffer. Like the pain was payment for all the pain I'd caused." The boy at Glorietta Pass. Him and others. So many others. Jacob's voice cracked. "I did terrible things in that war, Clara. Things I can never undo. When Garrett offered me a deal that seemed too good to be true, maybe part of me knew it was. Maybe part of me wanted to be trapped." Clara reached across the fire's glow and took his hand. "You were 19 years old fighting a war you didn't start. Whatever you did to survive. That doesn't make it right." "No, but it doesn't mean you deserve to suffer forever either." She squeezed his fingers. "The war is over, Jacob. Eliza is gone. You've spent years paying for sins that weren't yours to begin with. When does it end?" He looked at her, then really looked, and Clara saw the tears glistening in his eyes. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know how to let it end." "Then let me help you. Let me carry some of it." She moved closer, close enough to feel his warmth despite the cold night air. "That's what this is, isn't it, marriage? Sharing burdens. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She felt him shaking with cold or emotion she couldn't tell, and held him back just as fiercely. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against her hair. "That's not for you to decide." They stayed like that until the fire burned low, wrapped in blankets and each other, while the Montana stars wheeled overhead in their ancient endless dance. Helena was everything Jacob had described, and more. The streets bustled with people, horses' carriages. Buildings rose 2 and 3 stories high. The noise was overwhelming after the ranch's peaceful isolation. They found lodging at a modest boarding house near the courthouse and spent the evening reviewing their documents one final time. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Clara said as they prepared to sleep, "promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll let me do the talking. You know the ranching the numbers, but I know how to present an argument." She met his eyes steadily. "Trust me." "I do trust you, more than I've trusted anyone in years." "Then let me fight for us." Jacob nodded slowly. "All right, it's your show." Clara didn't sleep well that night. Her mind kept racing through scenarios: what Garrett might say, how the judge might rule, what they would do if everything fell apart. By the time dawn crept through the thin curtains, she felt more exhausted than when she'd lain down. But she rose dressed carefully in her best dress and made herself presentable. This was the most important day of her life, even more important than her wedding day. Because today would determine whether that wedding had any meaning at all. The courtroom was smaller than Clara had imagined, a wood-paneled room with rows of benches and a raised platform where Judge Harrison presided. Franklin Garrett was already seated when they arrived, accompanied by a slick-looking lawyer in a 3-piece suit. Clara had never seen Garrett before, but she knew him immediately. He was exactly what she'd expected, well-dressed, well-groomed, with cold eyes that assessed everything in terms of profit and loss. When he looked at Jacob, his thin lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "McAllister, I see you've brought reinforcements." "My wife," Jacob said flatly. "Clara." "Ah, yes, the blacksmith's daughter who ran off with a stranger rather than face her shame." Garrett's gaze traveled over Clara with insulting deliberation. "I heard about your wedding. Very dramatic. You seem well informed about matters that don't concern you." "Everything in this territory concerns me, Mrs. McAllister, especially the affairs of those who owe me money." Before Clara could respond, the clerk called the room to order. Judge Harrison entered, a silver-haired man with a stern face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He settled into his chair and surveyed the assembled parties. "This hearing concerns a dispute between Jacob McAllister and Franklin Garrett regarding the terms of a financial agreement executed in 1875. The judge's voice was flat, businesslike. "I have reviewed the documentation submitted by both parties. Mrs. McAllister, I understand you prepared the analysis questioning Mr. Garrett's interest calculations." Clara rose, her heart pounding. "Yes, Your Honor. You may proceed." She had practiced this 100 times, but standing in the courtroom with Garrett's cold eyes boring into her, the words nearly died in her throat. She thought of Jacob, of the ranch, of everything they stood to lose. Then she opened her mouth and began to speak. She walked the judge through every calculation, every discrepancy, every dollar that had been wrongly charged. She showed him how Garrett had manipulated the interest formulas, how he had used compound calculations where the contract specified simple interest, how the numbers had been systematically inflated to keep Jacob perpetually in debt. Garrett's lawyer objected repeatedly, but Clara held her ground. She had facts, she had figures, and she had the truth. "In summary, Your Honor," she concluded, "Mr. Garrett has overcharged my husband by approximately $2,300 over the course of 3 years. When this amount is applied against the outstanding principal, Mr. McAllister's actual debt is significantly less than what Mr. Garrett claims, and may in fact be close to satisfied." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harrison studied the documents Clara had provided, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Garrett," the judge said finally, Do you have a response? Garrett rose, his face rigid with controlled fury. Your Honor, Mrs. McAllister is a woman with no legal training attempting to interpret complex financial instruments she doesn't understand. Her calculations are flawed, her conclusions are wrong, and this entire proceeding is a waste of the court's time. Then perhaps you can explain the discrepancies she's identified. There are no discrepancies. The interest was calculated according to the terms of the contract. The contract specifies simple interest on the principal amount. Judge Harrison held up the document. Yet your records show compound interest calculated on rolling balances. That's a significant difference. Your Honor. Mr. Garrett, I have been a judge in this territory for 15 years. I have seen every kind of sharp dealing and predatory lending that exists, and what I see in these documents troubles me greatly. Garrett's composure cracked. This is outrageous. I am a respected businessman. My practices are entirely legal. Perhaps, but legal and ethical are not always the same thing. The judge set down the papers. I am ordering a full audit of all financial arrangements between Mr. Garrett and his debtors in this territory. In the meantime, all collection activities are suspended pending the results. You can't do that. I just did. Judge Harrison's voice was ice. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented, I find that Mr. McAllister has been systematically overcharged. The disputed amounts will be recalculated by an independent auditor. Any overpayments will be credited against the remaining balance. Clara felt her knees go weak. She reached for the table to steady herself. Additionally, the judge continued, I am referring this matter to the Territorial Attorney General for investigation into possible fraud. Mr. Garrett, I suggest you retain excellent legal counsel. You're going to need it. Garrett's face had gone purple with rage. This isn't over, McAllister. You and your wife have made a powerful enemy today. Mr. Garrett, Judge Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. You will address your remarks to the court, not to the other party, and you will refrain from making threats in my courtroom. I'm simply stating facts, Your Honor. Then let me state some facts. The judge rose, his robes swirling around him. If any harm comes to Mr. or Mrs. McAllister, if their property is damaged, their cattle stolen, their safety threatened in any way, I will hold you personally responsible. Am I clear? Garrett said nothing, but his eyes fixed on Clara promised violence. Court is adjourned. They didn't speak until they were outside on the steps of the courthouse, the winter sun bright overhead. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold Jacob's arm. We won, she whispered. Jacob, we won. You won. His voice was thick with emotion. You stood up there, and you fought for us, and you won. We're not finished yet. There's still the audit, the investigation. But we have a chance. A real chance. Jacob pulled her close right there on the courthouse steps, not caring who saw. You gave us that, Clara. You. She buried her face in his chest, letting the tears finally fall. All the fear, all the tension, all the sleepless nights. It all came pouring out in great shaking sobs that she couldn't control. I was so scared, she admitted. So scared I would fail, that I would let you down. You could never let me down. Jacob tilted her face up, wiping her tears with his rough thumbs. Never. He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Clara kissed him back, tasting salt and hope and the beginning of something new. The ride back to the ranch felt different, lighter, as if a weight that had been pressing on both of them had finally lifted. What happens now? Clara asked as they traveled through the thawing landscape. With Garrett, I mean. Now we wait. Let the auditors do their work. Let the investigation run its course. Jacob's voice was calm, steadier than she'd ever heard it. Garrett's not finished, men like him never are. But he's wounded now, and wounded animals make mistakes. You think he'll come after us? I think he'll try. But we'll be ready. He reached over and took her hand. We'll face it together. Clara watched the hills roll by, thinking about everything that had changed since that terrible day in the church. She had arrived at this ranch a broken woman, married to a stranger with nothing but her wounded pride and her mother's ring. Now she had a home, a purpose, a husband who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Jacob," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "That day at the wedding when you stepped forward, I thought you were mad. I thought we were both mad, a stranger marrying a stranger for reasons that made no sense. I remember. But somewhere along the way—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger. You became something else, something more." Jacob was very still beside her. "What are you saying, Clara?" She turned to face him, her heart pounding. "I'm saying I love you, not because you rescued me, or because you gave me a home, or because you need me. I love you because of who you are. The man who reads poetry when he thinks no one's looking. The man who works himself half to death for his people. The man who carries his wounds with such quiet dignity that I want to weep every time I think about it." Jacob's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Clara, you don't have to say it back. I know this wasn't what either of us planned. I know we came together for practical reasons. But I can't pretend anymore that my feelings are practical. They're not. They're messy and complicated and completely, utterly real." For a long moment, Jacob didn't respond. Then he pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the road, set down the reins, and turned to face her fully. "I have loved you," he said slowly, "since the moment you took my hand in that church. I loved you when you turned your father's grief into strength. I loved you when you stood up to Mrs. Harrington. I loved you when you organized my disaster of a study and made it make sense. Jacob, I have loved you every day since then, more and more, until I thought my heart would burst from it. I didn't say anything, because I didn't think I didn't dare to hope." Clara silenced him with a kiss. It was different from their previous kisses, fiercer, more urgent, full of everything they'd been holding back. She felt his hands in her hair, felt herself pulled against him, felt the world narrow down to just the two of them alone on a Montana road in the melting snow. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Clara McAllister, my wife, my partner, my home. And I love you, Jacob McAllister, my husband, my rescuer, my heart." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, as the wagon horses stamped impatiently and the sun continued its slow arc across the sky. Then, reluctantly, Jacob picked up the reins again. "We should keep moving. The ranch won't run itself." "No, it won't." Clara settled against his side closer than before. "But we have time. All the time in the world." Jacob smiled a real smile, the first full smile she'd ever seen on his scarred, beautiful face. "That we do, Mrs. McAllister. That we do." Spring came to Montana like a promise kept. The snow melted in slow rivulets, revealing the brown earth beneath. Green shoots pushed up through the mud. The cattle grew restless, ready for fresh pastures after the long winter. And at Broken Creek Ranch, Clara McAllister woke each morning to the sound of her husband's heartbeat, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The audit results arrived in late April. Clara was hanging laundry when Elijah rode in, waving an envelope like a flag of victory. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran to meet him, her heart pounding against her ribs. "From Helena," Elijah said, handing it down to her. "Official seal and everything." Jacob emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes found Clara's, asking the question he didn't need to voice. "Let's open it inside," she said. "Together." They gathered in the kitchen, Clara, Jacob, Martha, Elijah, and the other hands who had become family over the long winter months. Clara's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was 3 pages long, filled with legal language and official findings. But the summary at the top told them everything they needed to know. Total overpayment identified $2,847. Remaining debt after credit applied $0. Additional damages awarded $1,500. Clara read it aloud, her voice breaking on the numbers. $0. Jacob, we owe nothing. We owe nothing. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Martha let out a whoop that would have startled the cattle 3 pastures over, and the kitchen erupted into chaos. Elijah grabbed young Daniel and swung him around. Pete and Samuel pounded each other on the back. Martha was crying and laughing at the same time, her weathered face transformed by joy. And Jacob. Jacob simply stood there staring at Clara like she had hung the moon and stars. "It's over," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the celebration. "It's really over. It's over." Clara moved into his arms, holding him tight. "You're free, Jacob. We're free." He buried his face in her hair, and she felt his tears soaking through to her skin. This strong, stoic man who had carried his burdens in silence for so long, finally able to let them go. "I don't know how to—" His voice broke. "I don't know how to feel this much." "You don't have to know. You just have to feel it." They stood like that while the celebration swirled around them, 2 people who had found each other through catastrophe and emerged somehow into something beautiful. The news about Garrett spread quickly. The Territorial Attorney General had opened a full investigation into his business practices, and what they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Garrett had been running the same scheme on dozens of ranchers across Montana, manipulating contracts, inflating debts, driving men to ruin, so he could seize their land at a fraction of its value. They're saying he might go to prison. Martha reported one evening, having returned from a supply run to town with a head full of gossip. Federal charges. Wire fraud, mail fraud, everything they can throw at him. "Good," Jacob said flatly. "He deserves worse." "What about the men he ruined?" Clara asked. "The ranchers who lost everything." "Some of them are filing civil suits, trying to get their land back." Martha shook her head. "Won't be easy. Legal battles take years." Clara thought about all those families, men like Jacob driven to desperation by a predator in a fine suit. Some of them hadn't been as lucky. Some of them had lost everything. "We should help," she said suddenly. "We have the documentation, the calculations. We could share them with the other victims. Show them how to build their cases." Jacob looked at her for a long moment. "That would mean more work, more time in courtrooms, more dealing with lawyers." "I know. It could take years." "I know that too." His face softened into something like wonder. "You never stop fighting, do you?" "I'm married to a man who walked into a church and offered to marry a stranger just to right a wrong. Fighting seems to run in the family." Jacob laughed a real laugh, full and warm, the kind she'd been hearing more often as the weight of his burdens lifted. "All right then, let's help them." Over the following months, Clara became something of a legend in Montana territory, the rancher's wife who had taken down Franklin Garrett. She traveled to Helena 3 more times to consult with lawyers representing other victims. She created template documents that anyone could use to analyze their own contracts. She testified before a territorial committee investigating predatory lending practices. "You should run for office," Elijah joked one evening. "First woman governor of Montana." "Don't give her ideas," Jacob replied. "She'd probably win." Clara threw a dish rag at his head, but she was smiling. The summer that followed was the best the ranch had seen in years. With the debt cleared and the damages awarded, Jacob was finally able to invest in the operation properly. New equipment, better breeding stock, repairs that had been delayed for too long. "We should expand the herd," Clara suggested one morning, poring over the accounts. "Prices are good right now, and we have the pasture land." "We'd need to hire more hands." "Then we hire more hands." She looked up at him. Jacob, we have a real chance here. A chance to build something lasting. Something we can pass on. Pass on. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Clara, Jacob said slowly, are you saying? I'm saying I want a future with you. A real future. Children, grandchildren, generations of McAllisters on this land. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. If that's what you want too. Jacob crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. It's all I've ever wanted. A home, a family, someone to build a life with. He pulled back to look at her face. I just never thought I'd have it. Never thought I deserved it. You deserve everything, Jacob McAllister. Everything and more. He kissed her, then slow and sweet, and Clara felt the last walls between them crumble into dust. That night, for the first time since their wedding, she didn't sleep in the guest room. Her father visited in early autumn, making the long journey from Silver Ridge to see how his daughter was faring. Clara met him at the gate, her heart swelling at the sight of his weathered face. Pa! She threw herself into his arms like a child. I've missed you. Missed you too, sweetheart. Samuel Bennett held her tight, then pulled back to look at her. You look different, happier. I am happy, happier than I ever thought I'd be. She showed him around the ranch, the house she'd made into a home, the study where she'd untangled Jacob's finances, the garden where spring vegetables were already sprouting. She introduced him to Martha and Elijah, and the hands who treated him with the respect due to the father of the woman who had saved them all. And she introduced him properly this time to her husband. Jacob shook Samuel's hand firmly, meeting his eyes without flinching. Mr. Bennett, it's good to see you again. Is it? Samuel's voice was gruff. Last time we spoke, I threatened to kill you. I remember. Seems I might have been hasty. Samuel looked around at the ranch, at his daughter's glowing face, at the man who had given her a second chance at happiness. You've done right by her, McAllister, better than I expected. She's done right by me, more than right. Jacob's arm went around Clara's waist. I'm the lucky one, sir, every single day. Samuel nodded slowly. Good answer. He clapped Jacob on the shoulder. Welcome to the family, son. Officially. That evening, the 3 of them sat on the porch as the sun went down, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple. Lucy's getting married next spring, Samuel said. To a good man, a carpenter from Helena. She wanted me to ask if you'd come to the wedding. Of course, Clara said immediately. I wouldn't miss it. She's hoping you might. Samuel cleared his throat awkwardly. She's hoping you might stand up with her, as her maid of honor. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Her little sister getting married. How much had changed since her own wedding day, that terrible, wonderful day that had brought her to this place. Tell her yes. Tell her I'd be honored. Samuel nodded, satisfied. She'll be pleased. He rose, stretching his old bones. I should turn in. Long day tomorrow, have to start back early. You could stay longer, Clara offered. There's plenty of room. Can't. The forge doesn't run itself. But he smiled as he said it, the smile of a man content with his life. Besides, you newlyweds don't need an old man underfoot. After he'd gone inside, Clara leaned her head against Jacob's shoulder. Thank you for being patient with him. I know he can be gruff. He loves you, that's all that matters. Jacob pressed a kiss to her hair. I like him. He reminds me of what a father should be. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Jacob, Clara said quietly, I want to tell you something. What is it? She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. I've been to see the doctor in town, last week while you were in the north pasture. Jacob went very still. Clara, we're going to have a baby, sometime in the spring, he thinks. For a long moment, Jacob didn't move, didn't breathe. Then his hand pressed gently against her belly, as if trying to feel the new life growing there. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Yes." "Clara, His voice cracked. "I don't know what to say. I don't know how to—" "You don't have to say anything." She covered his hand with hers. "Just be here. Be happy. Be the father I know you'll be." "What if I'm not?" The fear in his voice was raw, vulnerable. "What if I fail? What if I hurt?" "You won't." Clara turned to face him, taking his face in her hands. "Listen to me, Jacob McAllister. You are the most honorable, most caring, most fiercely protective man I have ever known. Any child would be blessed to have you as a father." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you. I know your heart." She kissed him softly. "And I love you. All of you, the parts that are broken, and the parts that are healing, and the parts that are stronger than you know." Jacob pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I love you too. God, I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good." Clara smiled against his chest. "A little terror keeps us honest." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out wrapped in each other and the promise of the future. The winter that followed was fierce, perhaps the fiercest in memory. But Broken Creek Ranch was ready. Clara's careful management of the finances meant they had reserves for emergencies. Jacob's years of experience meant the cattle were protected. The fences reinforced the supplies stocked. And when the blizzards howled outside, they weathered them together, Clara growing rounder by the week, Jacob hovering over her with a protectiveness that would have been annoying if it hadn't been so endearing. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," Clara reminded him for the 100th time as he insisted she rest while Martha handled the cooking. "You're carrying my child. Humor me. Your child will be born thinking its mother is made of glass. Our child," Jacob corrected softly, "will be born knowing its mother is the strongest woman in Montana Territory. But even strong women need rest." Clara couldn't argue with that. Her body was tired in ways she'd never experienced before, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical labor. So she let Jacob fuss, let Martha coddle her, let Elijah bring her extra blankets, and the hands bring her little gifts. A carved wooden rattle, a soft doeskin blanket, a set of tiny booties knitted by Pete's wife in town. This child will be spoiled rotten before it's even born, Clara observed one evening surveying the collection of baby items that had accumulated in the corner of their bedroom. "Good," Jacob said firmly. "After everything we've been through, this child deserves to be spoiled." The baby came in early May on a night when rain lashed the windows and lightning split the sky. Clara labored for 12 hours with Martha and the doctor from town attending, while Jacob paced holes in the parlor floor. Elijah and the hands waited on the porch, hats in hands, looking like men facing a firing squad. When the first thin cry pierced the night, Jacob burst through the bedroom door before anyone could stop him. "Clara, come meet your daughter," Martha said, her weathered face streaming with tears. "She's perfect." Jacob crossed to the bed where Clara lay exhausted and radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that couldn't quite focus yet, but her grip when Jacob offered his finger was fierce and strong. "A daughter," he breathed. "We have a daughter. Do you want to hold her?" Jacob hesitated, looking at his large, scarred hands. "What if I—" "You won't." Clara transferred the baby into his arms. "Just support her head. There. You're a natural." Jacob stared down at the tiny face, and Clara watched as something fundamental shifted in his expression. The last shadows of his past. The war, the guilt, the years of struggling alone seemed to lift and dissolve, replaced by something she could only describe as wonder. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your pa. I know I don't look like much, but I promise you, I will spend every day of my life making sure you're safe and happy and loved." The baby blinked up at him and yawned. "I think she believes you." Clara said softly. She'd better. I mean every word. Jacob leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead, then looked at Clara with eyes full of tears. Thank you. Thank you for her. Thank you for everything. Thank you for stepping forward when no one else would. Clara reached up to touch his face. Thank you for saying those vows. They named her Elizabeth Eliza for short after the sister Jacob had lost so long ago. And as Clara watched her husband cradle their daughter in his strong arms, she thought about fate and chance and all the strange paths that had led them here. A year ago, she had been standing in a church in Silver Ridge, clutching a 3-line letter that had destroyed her world. She had thought her life was over. Instead, it had just been beginning. The years that followed brought more joy than Clara had ever imagined possible. Eliza grew from a wailing infant into a toddling terror, into a bright, curious child with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. She was followed by a son, Thomas, ironically enough named for no one in particular, but for the sound of it, and then another daughter, Mary, sweet-tempered and gentle, who followed her older siblings everywhere. The ranch prospered under Clara and Jacob's joint management. They expanded twice, buying up land from neighbors who were ready to retire, building new barns and hiring new hands. Elijah eventually took over as senior foreman, training young Daniel to take his place someday. Martha stayed on until her arthritis made work too painful, then retired to a small cottage in town that Clara and Jacob built for her. You didn't have to do this, Martha said when they showed her the cottage, her eyes bright with tears. Yes, we did, Clara replied. Your family. Lucy's wedding was everything Clara's had not been planned. Peaceful, attended by people who wished the couple well. Clara stood beside her sister at the altar and thought about her own wedding day, the chaos and heartbreak that had somehow led to the greatest happiness she'd ever known. Thomas Harrington sent a letter years later. Clara found it in the mail one autumn afternoon, a single page penned in his elegant hand, apologizing for everything and asking if she might consider forgiving him. She read it once, then fed it to the fire without responding. Who was it from? Jacob asked, watching the paper curl and blacken. No one important. That's so. That's so. Clara turned and kissed him long and deep. Just ghosts from another life. Nothing that matters now. And she meant it. On the evening of their 15th anniversary, Clara and Jacob sat on their porch, the same porch where they'd shared so many quiet moments over the years, and watched the sun set over their land. The children were inside with their latest housekeeper, their laughter drifting through the open windows. In the pastures below, cattle grazed peacefully. The mountains in the distance were purple with twilight. Do you ever regret it? Jacob asked quietly. That day in the church, saying yes to a stranger. Clara considered the question seriously, as she did all things. She thought about the life she had imagined with Thomas Harrington, comfortable, predictable, safe. She thought about the life she had built with Jacob McAllister, challenging, uncertain, full of storms and setbacks and hard-won victories. Not for a single moment, she said. Not once. Even the hard parts, the fights with Garrett, the blizzards, the years of struggle, especially those. Clara took his hand. Those years made us who we are. They taught me what I was capable of. They showed me what real partnership looks like. Jacob's fingers tightened around hers. I still can't believe you chose me. That day, and every day since. I didn't choose you, Jacob. Not really. Clara smiled, the expression coming easily after 15 years of practice. I just recognized you. The moment you walked into that church, something in me knew. Knew you were the one I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. That's a pretty story. It's the truth. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and the stars emerged. Somewhere in the house, Eliza was playing piano badly, but with enthusiasm. Young Thomas was arguing with his sister about something trivial. The sounds of family, of home, of everything Clara had never dared to dream of. I love you, Clara McAllister, Jacob said softly. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. And I love you, Jacob McAllister. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. Through storms and sunshine, through good years and bad. For as long as we both shall live. He kissed her forehead, and she closed her eyes perfectly content. 15 years ago, she had stood at an altar in a borrowed dress abandoned by a man who had promised to love her. She had been broken, humiliated, certain that her life was over. Then a stranger had stepped forward and changed everything. Not by rescuing her, Clara had never needed rescuing, but by seeing her, by choosing her, by walking into chaos and offering her his hand. That was the truth of their story. The lesson Clara had learned in 15 years of marriage love wasn't about saving someone. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about showing up. Every single day through the boring parts, and the beautiful parts, and the devastating parts. It was about saying, I'm here, and meaning it. Jacob had said those words to her once, standing in a church in Silver Ridge with 200 witnesses and nothing but his name to offer. He had been saying them ever since. And Clara, the blacksmith's daughter, who had been abandoned at the altar and found love with a scarred stranger, had finally learned to say them back. Sometimes the perfect life is the one you never planned. Sometimes the right person is the one you never expected. And sometimes, all it takes is someone brave enough to step forward and say 3 simple words, I'll say the vows.